This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki podcast, episode 62, June 9th, 2020. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. And my guests for this episode are Sarah Rodlund and Alexandra Paskulin, who also goes by Alex, who are both technical writers for the Wikimedia Foundation. Sarah works in the Developer Advocacy group, while Alex is in the core platform team. I consider myself a technical writer as well, in large part because I wrote the book Working with Mediawiki, which is pretty much the only Mediawiki reference book at the moment. And actually, it just recently came out with the fourth version, updated for 2020. So if you want to check it out, you can go to workingwithmediawiki.com. But that plug aside, I consider technical writing very important, so I'm excited to have both of them here. Sarah and Alex, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Sarah, let me start with you. First of all, where do you live?
I am based in Oakland, California.
Yeah. So back when the Wikimedia Foundation office was open pre-virus, were you working there at the office?
From time to time. I have to say that we're actually kind of lucky. We've been working as a remote organization for a long time now. So
Right.
Even when I first started the organization like 6 years ago, we had plenty of employees who were working from home, and I had been working out of the office daily, and probably around last year I started experimenting with a couple days a week at home, and then at some point I just went fully remote. So even before this, I've been fully remote.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. You got on the trend early. And Alex, how about you? Where do you live?
I'm in Oak Park, California, which is in the Los Angeles area.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. So Alex, how did you end up in technical writing?
That's a great question. I studied English and literature in college and really wanted to find a role where I could contribute my writing skills in a place where I felt that they were really needed. And I kind of stumbled into technical writing and have worked in a bunch of different industries. And I just love getting to learn new things and work with a bunch of different people. And it's been a great experience.
Yeah. So how did you specifically end up at the Wikimedia Foundation?
I have always been a huge fan of Wikipedia. You know, as a technical writer, it's kind of like the ultimate documentation project in my view. And so I had been, kind of closely monitoring the Wikimedia Foundation and, following them. And I had been to a couple meetups at some Write the Docs meetups. Write the Docs is an awesome organization that kind of organizes meetups of technical writers and documentation related folks all over the world. And I had been to a couple meetups at the Wikimedia Foundation offices in San Francisco when I lived in the Bay Area. I got to meet Sarah, got to meet Srishti, and just really, really had a great time. And so I really wanted to work here.
Cool. How about you, Sarah? How did you become a technical writer?
Oh, well, I've always been a writer. So my undergraduate degree is in organizational communications, and then I have a master's degree in writing. So I knew that I always wanted to be a writer, and I was always really, I think, just fascinated or just really in love with the idea of helping people understand information better. So taking complex ideas and making it easier for other people to understand. That's really foundationally what communication and writing are about.
Right.
I also wanted to have a career as a working writer. And I knew, I could write novels and still do the creative writing that I like to do. But then I could also be doing work as a working writer and kind of like showing people that was also possible, that we have value in many different areas.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of similarities, I think, between technical writing and other kinds of writing, even creative writing, in terms of, as you said, communicating complex ideas, or, Do you do creative writing?
I do creative writing. So actually, my master's degree is in poetry and nonfiction. So I feel like a long time ago I was a poet. I still work a lot on fiction on the side and work on nonfiction and essays. But I also just really love technical writing. I feel like there's something sort of I say this to people and it may sound weird, but there's something sort of like zen or relaxing about it in a way, in terms of like just being able to organize information in this way that's really easy to access and understand, and being able to kind of take the time to sit with words and information and put them together can also really be as stimulating as working on a short story or working on a piece of poetry. And I know that might sound really weird. Like, there may be creative writers who are like, what are you talking about? But I do have to say it really like works well with my brain. So
yeah. Well, of course, and those creative writers maybe have never tried technical writing, so they wouldn't necessarily know. How did you end up at the Wikimedia Foundation?
So I've been living in the Bay Area probably, I'm going to say I've been here over a decade, and I've been working, before I worked at the foundation, I worked for a company that worked with open access software. I've always, and before that was an educator, so I've always been really interested in education and access to knowledge. So when I saw a role come up at the Wikimedia Foundation, it just seemed like a really natural move. Because it really supports this idea of free knowledge for everyone. And so I just jumped at the idea to work there, and I've been there for about 6 years now.
Oh, okay. So, Sarah, you work in the Developer Advocacy group. Andre Klopper from your group was on this show, and he basically explained what the group does. If I remember correctly, you're advocating for more developers to use the Mediawiki API, or the Wikipedia API specifically, rather than advocating for the rights of Mediawiki developers. What you're advocating is the API itself, if I understand correctly.
So I think for me it's a little bit broader, and I see it more as that we're advocating for developers, or to kind of help developers be able to use, if it in the case, to use the API, or to be able to interact with Wikimedia projects.
Oh, okay. So well, maybe that's what Andre was saying. It's a little convoluted in my mind.
Yeah.
What kind of things do you work on as a technical writer for that group?
Wow. So I work on a lot of stuff. I feel like my work is kind of segmented between doing just strict technical documentation for engineers, and then working a lot with the developer community. The work that I do with the developer community is mainly working on resources for other technical writers in the community. One of the things that I found when I started is that while we do a lot for people who are engineers or developers or programmers, there wasn't a lot of information about technical writing or how to document work well. So I've spent a lot of time myself, or working with others the last couple of years, building up some of that documentation, working on the style guide, working on resources for other technical writers. And then on the other side, I do a lot of work mainly in ToolForge and Wiki and cloud services, working on that documentation. And I've just started working with pause documentation as well in the last few weeks. So I try to identify collections that could really use a little bit of help or a little bit of oversight, and work with those. Oh, and then we also I forgot about this completely. We had this project last year working on the Mediawiki Action API documentation, where we really worked to kind of engage the community and bring them in to work on that project as well.
Yeah, okay. What is this pause thing?
Pause, it is basically a version of Jupyter Notebooks.
Okay.
And it's and so it's kind of hosted. It's like Notebooks as a service, and so we're doing a little bit of a rebuild of that right now. And so our engineers were talking about it with me, and they said, we're working on this, and the documentation is kind of all over the place. Can we take a look at it? So I've been working on an audit of that documentation and looking at like where are the critical places that we can improve that and make that better for end users.
Yeah. So you mentioned the style guide. Are you talking about the color scheme and all that kind of stuff, or a writing style guide?
It's a technical writing style guide, and it can be a little bit of everything, just depending on what you're doing. So one of the things that we did with it is we didn't want to stray too far from the Wikipedia style guide, because Wikipedia actually has a really robust style guide, but it misses a lot of elements about how to document complex technical processes. So this style guide covers things like kinds of genres of documents, and then how to document things like how do you document code in context, how do you write about certain things that are a little bit more technical, or illustrate those to users, and that might not be available in the Wikipedia style guide, which covers more English language usage and formatting for Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm looking at this now. I don't know if I'd seen this before. These guidelines for technical writing and editing. Yeah, this is pretty neat. And I mean, some of this, if people have read, the Strunk and White guide for writing, some of this kind of echoes that in terms of avoiding slang or colloquialisms or ambiguity, and being precise but friendly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, actually. So there's, just for background for people who maybe aren't writers, there are a myriad of style guides that people use just to keep writing consistent across their platforms or across the work that they're doing. And so this is just a way to, especially in a project that's as big as ours, there's so many people coming to it and working on it together. This is a way to kind of keep people on the same page and have a little bit of a consistency between the documentation that they're writing.
Yeah. Cool. And Alex, you work in the core platform team. What kind of things do you do there?
My time is split between supporting new products that the core platform team puts out and helping with documentation for that, and then working on kind of the broader documentation strategy in collaboration with Sarah.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like you also are doing a lot of, meta documentation as opposed to documentation. Is that fair, or do you do both?
I do both. I would say that I would love to be doing more meta documentation,
really? Okay.
But I think that there's a lot of kind of need for my help in terms of new projects that are coming out of my team. So I spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah. Well, this is a Mediawiki program specifically. So Alex, let me ask you this. Mediawiki.org is where the Mediawiki documentation goes, and of course, a lot of non-Mediawiki documentation also. A lot of people have complained about the state of the documentation there, whether it's extensions that have outdated documentation, or it's hard to navigate around because there's no real table of contents. I actually had a problem recently, just to give a specific example, where I was trying to use a MediaWiki-specific library called OOUI. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's what you're supposed to use when you want to put form elements on the screen. It's available for both JavaScript and PHP. The JavaScript documentation is okay, but the PHP documentation, which is what I was trying to use, is very minimal. There's basically only one example, which is for a button. So the thing I was trying to make was a button, but it's a submit button for a form, which is more complicated than just the standard button, and I couldn't figure it out. And then someone else asked me how to do tabs with OOUI and PHP, and neither of us could figure that out either. Anyway, I know technical documentation is sort of an endless project, but do you have any thoughts on the state of the Mediawiki documentation?
Yeah, I think that you've hit upon a lot of kind of the main pain points with the site. I think that there's a lot of content, and that's for better or for worse, right? Because on the one hand, you do have a lot of information there, but on the other hand, it can be really overwhelming. And I think that Mediawiki.org is a really ambitious documentation project because it has translate capabilities, and it's not just covering the Mediawiki software. There's a lot of other content in there, as you said, the OOUI documentation and, many other components. Right. So I think there's a lot of really great opportunities to, work together and try and address some of these problems. I think that one of the things that I'm focused on is trying to make things easier to find, easier to use, without necessarily shutting down too many avenues for people to contribute. Like, for example, with the OOUI documentation, there's wiki content, there's content that's generated from the source, and these things kind of come into conflict, right? Because with the source documentation, on the one hand, it's easier to maintain, it should be more up to date than the wiki documentation, right. But there's so many more contributors that prefer that wiki flow. So I'd like to make sure that we can kind of incorporate all audiences and workflows where possible.
Yeah, I mean, is there? What's the solution for that? Is there something that's not being done right now, or is it just a matter of just you keep working on it?
I think it's a matter of, of course, keep working on it, but I think that there's some good opportunities to put in some engineering effort into solving these problems. There's a phrase that's kind of being thrown around in the documentation community, which is doc ops, which is kind of essentially, what is your automation tooling? How do these things fit together? And I think that we can work together to spec out some of this stuff and start moving it forward. And if we can break it out into smaller chunks, maybe it wouldn't be so overwhelming. There's no magic solution to any of this. And I think that one of the really cool things about the Mediawiki documentation and the Wikimedia documentation in general is it does have these really ambitious goals. And so I think that we can push this forward a little bit, and we can, set an example for other documentation projects to show them how you can create this multilingual documentation base and have it be really accessible and open.
Right. Yeah, I want to get to the multilingual stuff later, but another question about that is, do you see the role of technical writers as, in some sense, being an enforcer, or is there, or should there be someone, telling developers, you've created this extension or library or whatever it is, now you have to document it, and it has to be at least a certain length, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I would probably go with something more like facilitator over enforcer. Right. But I do think there is a place for someone to be, watching patch requests on Gerrit and saying, hey, have you documented this? And could we even automate that process? Could we build something into CI that says, oh, I noticed you changed the file. Did you know that there's this wiki page that you might want to update? So I think that there's room for some guidance. But I think that in general, in my experience, developers want to write documentation, right? They're writing documentation for their future selves. And I think that everyone can empathize with that. So yeah, I think that it's the role of technical writers, but I think that also everyone can do that. So if you see a patch request that needs documentation, if you see a wiki page and you have a question, there's something maybe not covered, jump in, ask.
Yeah, can I jump in on that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is Sarah. And I think in Alex's view, that's so essential because we are a community project. And I think that's what's so exciting about working on Mediawiki documentation or any documentation for the Wikimedia projects is that writing is a collaborative effort. Documentation is a collaborative effort. And this is this amazing space where we get to work with people in collaboration and see how they do it together. So my feeling is that there will always be a little bit of a mess, and that mess is okay because we're kind of working through that and trying to figure that out together. And that is just as essential to our project as everything else that we do is doing it in community.
Yeah, that makes sense. But Sarah, I wonder. I guess this gets back to the idea of enforcement, although that's probably the wrong word. But I wonder if there's more that should be done to just, to I guess track problems in documentation like bugs are tracked, and say it's at least recorded somewhere that whoever created this library extension at least knows that the documentation at this point is lacking.
Yeah, I would say too, I think that's part of what Alex and I and other people working on documentation in the movement are trying to work on right now. We do have, in Fabricator, we have a documentation workboard, and it is large. I mean, people tag everything as documentation. So part of, I wouldn't say it's to be an enforcer, but part of our role is to help organize that process, kind of organize that chaos and make it easy for people to be able to do this work. Because I think one of the things that I realized when I came into this role is we really didn't have any processes for that. We didn't have processes for surfacing documentation, deciding what was important, auditing documentation, understanding what the needs of users were. And so one of the things that I try to think about in terms of our projects is that we're not in a fully mature state with that, but we're working our way toward that. And so this is a part of becoming, kind of gaining that maturity. But I would say, I think I just take issue with the word enforcer.
Well, yeah, okay.
We can't, nor would we want to police that. When you have such a vast community, you really have to look at what are people doing now? What are the processes they're engaging in now? And how do you come in and work with the existing systems and the existing software that people have and their existing patterns to get them to be able to kind of take in another behavior or take in another way of doing things. And so that takes a little tinkering and experimentation, because what you want for people to adopt these things because they're easier or they work better or they improve things, but not just because you say, it's kind of like when somebody tells you something's good for you and you're definitely like, I'm not going to do that.
Sure.
You kind of have to let people decide, you have to be an example, and you have to help people decide that that's what they will, if this is going to work for them.
Yeah. If I had to rephrase it, maybe I would say a nudger. That's like a popular word these days.
I would say I like this phrase. It comes from teaching. It's a guide on the side, basically. Huh. So you kind of, on a very base level, you can kind of be a person who can answer questions or help or kind of say, this is the best practice or this is a process that might work. But in the end, it takes, I'll always go back to community. In the end, it takes a community to adopt it,
right,
and kind of implement it together. Otherwise, for our projects, I don't think it will work very well. I can't think of a case in the many years that I've been at the foundation where telling people that to do something works as well as working with them to make it happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's an interesting aspect to the documentation on Mediawiki.org, which Alex, you mentioned a little bit, which people might not even know about unless you've edited the pages, which is that a lot of the pages have little translation tags all over so that people can translate little snippets of those pages into other languages. That's all done through an extension called Translate. I don't know of any other software documentation, open source or otherwise, that does things that way. I'm definitely a fan of translation and making translation as easy as possible, but it's also kind of annoying to deal with, especially if you're thinking of rearranging an entire page and thus messing up all the current tags. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that, the pluses and minuses of that approach.
Yeah, interestingly, this has come up multiple times in the past day and a half. So
okay.
It's kind of, I think, something that's fresh on everyone's mind. I don't know specifically the history of the Translate extension, and kind of the story of the development there, but from my perspective, it seems like the current translation system is optimized for translators more than it is for people who are editing the page content in English.
Right.
Which is why it's, it's kind of frustrating when you go in and you see all these translate tags. And I think that, there's really a trade-off there between making the documentation more inclusive, more accessible, and, having your page be marked up with all these translation tags.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to change anytime soon unless these discussions have been about, overhauling the entire system. Okay. Here's something else I wonder about. There are a few ways, as a developer, I think there are a few ways I think technical writing is like programming. I think it's definitely true for the case of programming anything that relates to the user interface. What you discover when you do that, or at least what I discover, is in both cases it's never as obvious to users as you think it is. So you might have what you think is a really clever interface or a well-worded explanation, but then it turns out that some users or readers just have no idea what it means. Alex, I wonder, what are the mechanisms you have for getting feedback on what you've written?
That's a great question. Feedback is, of course, so important because, as you said, something can make perfect sense to you and, it can go out to users and it can be completely opaque to them. So I think that one of the most important things is having channels of feedback open. In Mediawiki, we have, of course, talk pages, which are a great way for people to, jump in, ask questions, and provide feedback. I think some of the challenges with that is that you're not able to leave a comment on a specific line of the document or a specific section. It's more of a general comment.
Right.
But I think that the most success I've had getting feedback from people has been asking them directly. So I'm sure you've heard people say, when you're writing documentation, have a specific user in mind or a couple users in mind, and that kind of helps you write specifically for them. So if it's possible to reach out to people, even just friends, if you're writing something that's supposed to be kind of widely understandable, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. Sarah, you wrote something I thought was interesting that relates to that on your user page. You wrote, "I approach technical documentation with empathy for my audiences," which might sound like a strange thing to say when you're talking about describing an API or something. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So I think it goes back to exactly what you said, is sometimes we create something and it's like, or we have the space that we're in, and so that's our world. That's what we see. But that's not necessarily what a member of our audience sees. To use an example of myself, like I'm a US American, I have a master's degree in writing. I am often writing for an audience where English is not the first language for people. So how am I going to craft my writing to make it easier for them to understand what I say? When Alex was talking, I was also thinking about how one of the things that we did, one of the first exercises we did together was we built a bunch of personas, different types of people or audiences that would actually be reading our documentation. And then the first question that I always ask myself when I sit down to a writing task or when somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to put this documentation together, is who's your audience? Who's going to read this? Who are they? What do they need to know? Because you already know how to communicate with yourself, right. But it's really like, how do you open that up and make those ideas like wide enough that other people can see what's going on in your head and understand what that really complex process is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I should note maybe half of the audience, if the metrics are correct, of this podcast come from non-English speaking countries. Maybe 40% or something. But I definitely try to be conscious of that, and not to use too many big words or cliches, that kind of thing. So Moving on, part of the reason I wanted to talk to both of you now is that there's this upcoming program called the Google Season of Docs, which I believe the Wikimedia Foundation just got accepted into for this year. Not a big surprise, but the two of you will be the co-administrators for it. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, I know the Google Summer of Code, and actually there have been a bunch of people on this show who were students or mentors for that. I think just from projects that I mentored, there have been 4 different former students of mine on this show. Sarah, I think you were also a mentor for the Google Summer of Code at one point, no?
No, I did Season of Docs last year. So we had Season of Docs last year, and then I've done mentoring for Outreachy.
Oh, okay. All right. There's a project involve something about Mediawiki Action API modules that it seemed like you.
That might. Okay, yeah. I wouldn't say I was a.
What, unofficial mentor or something?
I'd have to actually check. Maybe an unofficial mentor.
Okay.
I'd actually have to check because I've done mentoring for a lot of the programs, and that may be.
Yeah, it all right. It all blurs together. Yeah.
It does a little bit, and that particular project, the Mediawiki Action API, actually is one of our cool showcase projects where we worked with students or with interns from Outreachy, students from Summer of Code. So there are a lot of different people working on that, working on different aspects of that. So those programs also overlapped a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Yeah, so there's Google Summer of Code, and you mentioned Outreachy. There's also Google Code-In, which I don't know if it's even been mentioned on this podcast before, but it's intended for high school students, while the Google Summer of Code is for college students. But this is a third Google program, and I think it's just those 3 as far as Google open source programs go, but who knows. So Sarah, can you explain what the Google Season of Docs is?
Yeah, so Google Season of Docs, it's in its second year. There's been a lot of demand for it over the years. We participated last year, and this will be our second go round. Basically, the program is meant to pair technical writers with open source organizations, so that there's a little learning that happens on both sides. So a lot of technical writers are often working in other kinds of organizations and don't have as much experience in open source. And a lot of open source projects really need the help of technical writers. And so this program brings them together.
Yeah. By the way, it seems like it should be from the timing of it. It seems like it should be called the Fall of Docs or the Autumn of Docs or something.
Right?
Yeah, who knows? I don't know.
But, it really, because we started work on it, it's kind of a long program. We started work on it in the last month, putting our organizational application together. And then we're working with, we're fielding a lot from people who are interested in writing a proposal for it right now. So the way that it works, I think I missed this part, is that we kind of say, like, here are some things that we would like to work on in our project. And then the applicants or the participants create a proposal for us about what they'd like to do. And then we work with them on their proposals, and they spend about 3 months working on those projects with us directly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's longer than just the period of time when the writing actually happens. Okay. So I mean, with the other programs, which are for college and high school students, there's the idea is it's a recruitment tool. You get people when they're young to join your open source project. Here is there also a similar kind of idea that you want technical writers to stay on with your project, Mediawiki or whatever it is, after they're done?
I think ideally that's what we'd like to see. I mean, part of it is educating a whole group of people about open source, but also having people stick around the projects afterwards. Our Google Season of Docs participant from last year has stuck around and actually mentored in Google Code-In, Google Outreach. I think Outreachy. I mean, she's mentored in a lot of the programs since we had Google Season of Docs last year, and then she's worked on documentation, and then even this year coming back into doing the next season of Docs. She's really stuck around and been working in that community as well. So like in terms of like having participants who are super engaged, I am so excited and couldn't ask for more from the people who participated in those programs. So I really hope that we have the same experience this coming year with our next intern.
Yeah, okay. It's probably going to be just one person again.
Yeah, we only do one. The program's not. I'm not sure how many people are in. I'm going to get these mixed up now. In Summer of Code, I think it's a lot more. But because this is a newer program, and because like we're also always measuring for capacity on our team as well, we only take one intern for the program each year.
Yeah. Okay. And Alex, is this your first time getting involved?
It is. It's been really exciting. It's been a lot of fun talking to the participants, and I'm excited to see their proposals.
Yeah, cool. Well, since we're talking about, recruiting writers, do either of you know if any of the groups of the Wikimedia Foundation are hiring right now for technical writers?
They're not. But
okay.
I would point out that Google Season of Docs is a paid program. There is a stipend involved with that. So it's kind of like a mini paid internship with the foundation.
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, that's it. Well, all right. Yeah, if anybody out there is interested, is already a technical writer and interested in doing that, it definitely sounds like a great program. If it's not too late to apply, I guess it's not too late.
Oh, it's not too late.
Yeah.
No, June 9th is actually the day the application's open for it. So we've been talking about it fairly early, and part of that is we really want to be inviting to people who are interested in the program to share their ideas early, like so that they can get feedback from the community about their projects as well. So that's one of the things that we're asking people is if they're interested to really reach out to us and also like share their ideas on Fabricator or on we use Zulip to communicate about Season of the Docs, so we have a community there as well.
Yeah. I mean, outside of the Season of Docs, or outside of being paid, just in terms of being a volunteer, I guess either of you, if someone wants to start contributing to Mediawiki or other Wikimedia documentation, obviously it's wikis, so you can just go in and start editing. But is there anything, if someone wants to, talk to someone about it or that kind of thing, what should they do?
Keep waiting for Alex.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
No, but I was going to say, one of the things they can do is they can actually start working on, at a very basic level. If they see something that needs work, they can start working on it. They can look at the documentation board on Fabricator, which is the system that we use to organize a lot of our projects. We also have a list of good first documentation tasks.
Oh, okay.
And then, and I don't know if you're taking links after this, we can share some of that with
definitely.
you. And then one of the things that Alex and I are actually working on, hopefully starting this quarter, is in the past we've had a special interest group for documentation, and we're kind of relaunching it as Friends of the Docs. So we really want to do some outreach in the community to really actually create what you're talking about, which is like a space for people who want to do documentation, because just like contributing to the projects can sometimes be a little bit hard when you first start and you're just not sure where to go or who to ask. We really want to create a place or a group of people that are working on documentation that people feel comfortable asking questions of.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw something about that Friends of the Docs concept. It was a talk someone gave. Sarah, could you describe that concept in more detail?
Yeah, it actually comes from, and I don't have the person's name right now, so I feel really bad about this off the top of my head, but it was a Write the Docs talk a couple of years ago at the Right to Docs conference in Portland. This person came and talked about a program they implemented in their organization, which was really like doing outreach in a Friends of the Docs kind of way, like really looking at who are the people that are working on documentation, finding ways to reward them and encourage them, and to bring them into the fold. Because as Alex said, like we do know that devs like to document. They like a lot of people like to document. They just don't always know exactly where to get started, or like where their skills will be best used. And so as we work on this, we're hoping that this is a way to really encourage that with people.
Yeah. I guess it's a nice term for it. By the way, I think the looks like the person's name is Heather Stenson.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for crediting her.
Yeah.
I don't want to take that idea. Like we did, like I heard that and I loved it so much because it's so much better than saying like a special interest group or or something that's kind of like a group that might not feel inclusive of other people. And I feel like this is something that people can kind of come and go in, and they don't have to say, declare I'm a technical writer, which is not always like something people feel they are. They just feel that they're interested in documentation, or they have something that they can contribute, and this is a place they can do it.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I could jump in on that, I think there is a great opportunity for people who are interested in documentation to contribute to Mediawiki and to Wikimedia documentation, because I think the barrier to entry is a lot lower than in a lot of open source documentation. You can contribute on Wiki. You don't necessarily need to learn Git in order to contribute. So I think it's a great way for a wider audience of people to get involved with open source.
Yeah. Are there? Well, you mentioned that there's Sarah. You mentioned that there's a specific list of helpful of starting projects. But I wonder, do either of you know, are there more general areas of the documentation that need a lot of work that you'd be really happy if someone came in and started adding to, or is it pretty much everything?
It's pretty much everything, but this may sound a little low level, but Alex and I were actually just talking, I think yesterday, about how it would be really useful to have people that are just looking at style and grammar on some of the documentation, because a lot of times people are writing documentation, but it's not getting that second look over just for like, is this written well? Is this written in an understandable way? And so there's a whole lot that people can do with things that already exist. So if they see like a piece of documentation that needs some form of improvement, they don't necessarily have to rewrite a whole new thing. They can be working on some of that. And so this is kind of intentional, but that's something we're also like thinking about, like how do we elevate that a little bit more and share that with people a little bit, as well as like a way to just kind of like even start editing on Wiki. Just to get motivated or started with it to begin with.
Yeah.
Alex, do you have...
that's what I was going to ask too. Yeah.
Alex, and if she had
Yeah, I think I think that's a great question. I think that there is definitely room for improvement in a lot of different areas on MediaWiki.org. I think, as Sarah was saying, fixing small things is often kind of like the easiest way to get started, especially if you don't have a lot of deep code knowledge in terms of, what's actually going on with MediaWiki with extensions. Another good place to start is if you see callouts on pages or on specific sections that say that are outdated, that's always a great place to start too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you see that every once in a while, the tags at the top that's,
Yeah. And I think it's a great thing that we can learn from our experiences on Wikipedia is how do we mark up our documentation? How do we leave notes for our future selves? This needs to be more clear. This needs an example. This is outdated. I think that there's an opportunity to bring in more of that into our documentation.
Yeah. Yeah, could MediaWiki.org benefit from more of the Wikipedia tags, or maybe those are already defined for MediaWiki.org? I don't know, but Wikipedia has dozens of different tags. this, this part is ambiguous, or please expand, and all that.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. There are a couple templates we already use in the documentation template example page. Things like this page is outdated, this page is a draft, but I think there's an opportunity to bring in kind of even more of those kinds of annotations.
Cool.
I'd like to see like some more inline, some more ability to just say inline, like this particular area or this particular thing needs to be worked on.
Yeah. It makes sense. Although often you can tell when if you look at an extension page and it says, it says it's supported until Mediawiki 116 or something, you can usually guess that something there needs work. Alex, I wonder, since we're, talking about recruiting, quote unquote, all that kind of stuff, I wonder if you have some pitch that you give to people who are considering, well, either going into technical writing or are already writers and are considering doing open source writing or working specifically on anything Wikimedia related. I guess those are 3 different questions, but
yeah, definitely. I love to encourage people to go into technical writing. I think it's a really great field. I think it's a growing field, and I think that it's a field that's increasingly proving to have more and more value in different types of organizations. And one of the things I always say to writers is, where else are you going to be able to learn so much about things that you maybe never would have learned about? So I think that it's a really interesting field. I think there's a lot of overlaps with education. And I think there's a lot of people who, could really bring their skills and contribute. And I'm always trying to get people into open source. I think that working on open source projects is just like a really cool experience. You get to work with people all over the world. I've gotten to work with amazing people, in so many different countries. And it's just been a really rewarding experience. And I kind of already said this, but, I think that Mediawiki and Wikimedia is a great place to contribute as a writer, because there are so many avenues for you to contribute. You can translate, you can work on a grammar, and then if you want, you can go in and you can work on the more technical documentation. You can submit a patch. So there's kind of all those different levels.
Yeah. It is true. When you're working on open source, you get to meet definitely a much broader spectrum of people, or a bigger group of people than you would just in-house at some software company or whatever it is that you're doing. Is there a shortage of technical writers at the moment, just in general? People say there's a shortage of programmers. I'm not even. There's mixed views on that, but do you know? I mean, is it just in terms of the job market?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how to know that, how to be able to speak to that with confidence. I would say that there is not a shortage of job postings for technical writers. There are definitely a lot of opportunities in a lot of different industries. And there's also a lot of different types of technical writing. I think that we in open source tend to think of our, web-hosted open source docs as kind of the documentation standard, but there's a lot of different types of documentation. There's a lot of different types of technical writers. So yeah, I'm not sure how to say with confidence whether or not there's a shortage. Maybe Sarah knows.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I don't know if there's a shortage. I did a talk, maybe, it feels like time is just like colliding. I did the tech talk months ago, last fall. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the date. And I looked up statistics then, and it wasn't about as much a shortage, but that year over year technical writing is growing as a field, and I totally see that, especially even now as we're going to more of a remote workforce. The high, like, more and more of a need to be able to communicate to people asynchronously about things. It's becoming increasingly more important. But I think that's it. That's
okay.
actually what I it. Yeah.
Sorry. Let me just ask you the broader question. I mean, we've already talked, I guess, about the benefits of technical writing, but is there something specific that you say to writers who are considering going into technical writing?
Well, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, like, selfishly, it's the same as Alex said. Like, I get to learn something new every day, and I get to learn really interesting, complicated things that maybe I wouldn't have like known before, and I get to share that with other people, which is really cool. So it's like being a technical writer, you're kind of constantly cracking open like this nut of knowledge and being like, here's this thing.
That's an interesting metaphor. Yeah.
And it feels really great. I have like this kind of spiel that I always tell people, like, I feel like technical writing is really one of the most essential and ancient forms of communication, because if we look at things like, and this goes back to like creative writing, but if we look at things like mythology, that's all technical communication, right? That's all a way to explain like how the world works, or how different things are working in your body, or in your life, or like how to like do or make this thing. And so part of me loves technical writing just because it feels like way older than all of us and super essential to us as human beings. I feel like that's a really weird hippie answer, but at the same time, I'm like, it really does feel that way sometimes to me. And then I think just in terms of like practicality, if you're a person like me or Alex, who both have degrees in English, who are both or writers or really into literature, as far as a field, like a profession goes, this is a really good field for us. This is, steady work. It's really interesting work, and you can really make a life being a technical writer. And so that's, for me, super important. So yeah, those are kind of some of the things that I tell people when they're thinking about going into it.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I'm glad I asked that follow up. I've never really thought of the Bible or mythological text as technical writing, but it makes sense. I'll have to think about that. Yeah. Very good. I think that's a good way to wrap up this podcast. Sarah and Alex, it was great talking to both of you, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guests, Sarah Rodlund and Alexandra Paskulin of the Wikimedia Foundation, both technical writers. This is usually the part where I'd say stay safe, stay productive, but stay safe has kind of become a cliche at this point, speaking of cliches, even though, of course, I do want everyone to stay safe. But I'll just say stay productive. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.